Beautiful experiments done recently showing that, for instance, if you're watching a sports game, regardless of whether or not your team scores, like let's say basketball goes down court, let's say they miss the three-pointer and then it's a close game, there's a little blip of dopamine that says that was one segment of time. And so dopamine is a big way in which we segment time. The other way are blinks, believe it or not.
What?
Yeah, that every time we blink, this is a paper published in Current Biology, every time we blink, we reset our perception of time.
That one I understand more, I guess, than the dopamine. Why would dopamine be involved in time?
Perfect question. Turns out that the frequency of blinking is set by the baseline level of dopamine in the brain. Yes. So when people are wide-eyed with excitement and they're not blinking very often, or someone is on a drug that kicks out a lot of dopamine, they hardly ever blink, their pupils are huge. They are actually not segmenting time in the normal fashion.
Whoa.
And so much of your life, in retrospect, is segmented by those peaks in dopamine. Those mark key events in your life. When you met your wife, there are all the segments of your life are noted by peaks in dopamine or the way that you happen to conceptualize dopamine. And so also people who are depressed are often very focused on the past. Naturally, they default to ruminating on the past. When you adjust people's dopamine levels to healthy levels, they start becoming more forward thinking and more present. And so there's this relationship between blinking and time perception, dopamine and blinking. How you conceptualize time has a lot to do with these peaks in dopamine and when they occur. The dopamine peaks and the frequency of those dopamine peaks have everything to do with how we carve up our experience of time. And anyone who's spent a lot of time in deep meditation starts to develop a kind of intuitive internal representation of the fact that time is very fluid in this way. And when we say time is fluid, what we mean is the secretion of dopamine in these pulses is very fluid. They are under control of what's happening externally, but also how you conceptualize your life. Like, where are you in your life? Hopefully if David Sinclair has his way, and hopefully he will, we will all live to be more than 100 years old. Hopefully in good vitality. So this is the more esoteric aspect of dopamine.
Real fast, before we move off the time thing, let me ask you. So there was a period in my life, I'll peg it at about 2 years, where for whatever reason, it could have been 6 hours since I last looked at a clock, I would be within 3 minutes of what time it was. And my wife found it hilarious, and so she'd be like, what time is it? And I'm like, oh, it's 4:58. She'd look at it.
Dundee,
it was so weird that it like made my radar is like, oh my God, I have like this special power. And then it went away. And now I can probably get you within 15 minutes, but like, it was really eerie. Does that make a prediction or around like a consistency of dopamine release or something?
Yeah, you nailed it. It's the consistency. It's an interval timer, as we say. So when people's dopamine is low, they tend to overestimate. Okay. And when people's dopamine is high, they tend to underestimate time. Now, it is true that dopamine, when it's released, is a little bit of a stimulant in the system because of the way it works with epinephrine. How finely you slice time is very dependent on dopamine and your internal level of autonomic arousal. A really good example would be you're really excited about something or you're really stressed about something, doesn't matter. Dopamine is elevated in excitement, but norepinephrine, epinephrine tend to be elevated anytime we're agitated or excited. Just imagine you need to catch a flight, you're in line at the security, and the person in front of you seems like they're going really, really slowly.
Well, yeah.
Your frame rate is faster. You're just carving up time more finely. People who are in car accidents and then they report everything being in slow motion, your frame rate is smaller. You're essentially you're taking larger time bins. And this is why, let's say you wake up and you're really tired, or you're kind of out of it, and you look and it's like text messages and emails and all this stuff. The world seems like it's going by really, really fast. Dopamine is the dynamic process dopamine release, I should say, is the dynamic process by which you adjust time perception. So if you had a very keen perception of the passage of time, right down to the minute or so, that suggests very regular intervals of dopamine release. And that's probably tied to outside events that are below your conscious awareness. But dopamine releases, I sort of, not to make this PG-13 or R-rated, but if we go back to the example of sex and sleep are the two times when space and time have a very fluid type relationship. It's very hard to conceive space and time in sleep. That's actually the nature of sleep, is we do the long blink, no joke. We close the shutters, stop bringing in external information. And in sleep, space and time are very fluid, right?
Very.
Things can happen very fast or very slow. Slow motion, you can be flying. There's a lot of, some of it is dreaming, but space and time are very fluid. In wakefulness, space and time are very anchored by physical events in the world, but our perception of those is dynamically regulated by how much dopamine is in our system. So it's beginning to sound like dopamine does everything, but it's really associated with motivation, craving, and time interval keeping. And so I would be willing to bet that your pulses of dopamine were very regular.